Okay, hello. This is a bit of a different video. As you can see, there's a pause button here, and that's because I was having some difficulties recording this in one go and doing my voice, so I'm doing a voiceover of the build while I'm going. Yeah, it's a voiceover basically instead of me actually doing it while I'm doing it. Should be a bit more enjoyable that way, and I can also increase the speed a little bit, which should be pretty good for you. And let's make sure this is turned on. There we go. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining how to use Eevee and a few of the things that helps make it more realistic. Like, for example, don't use an HDRI, not HDRI. Yeah, HDRI. And I'll explain that in a second, which actually I believe I might end up showing it in here. There we go, make sure speed's on normal, even a little bit slower. But let me set up an HDR. Let this previous version of me that's been recorded set up its HDRI. If you actually see this is not a good example. Let's see if there we go. Nope, that's the wrong one. This one here, you can actually sort of see it slightly. I don't zoom in actually, but if you could zoom in, there, right there. So let me see. Can I zoom in? Let's see, zoom in all the way. Okay, these pixels right here, which if I was actually zoomed in Blender, you could see it much better, but there's light spots right there. Now, as you can tell, the light's coming from this direction, so those light spots are showing up through the build. And that is an issue with the HDRI. I'm sure there's a setting to fix it because I end up fixing it later using different kinds of lights, but to fix the issue, I actually, instead of using an HDRI, I end up using a just normal standard lights, which I'll be showing you that later. But basically that's called light bleed, so light will bleed through objects. Now in this section over here to actually do what we're about to do, which is going to turn off the light. So light path will be turned off, and basically this will be all in black, but you'll still be able to see the picture. So you do Shift A, go to input, then light path, which you'll see me open up. And then you noodle over is camera ray, the top one, to the strength. So basically, you have the image in the background, but you will not have any light going onto the scene, which is exactly what we want, because that really allows us to have more control. Now, what I end up doing right here is I get a lamp by pressing Shift A and getting a lamp, and then I adjust the lamp to be around the same position as the sun in the picture so that it sort of fits in and it's more realistic, because there's more settings with the sun lamp than there is with an HDRI, at least that I've found. It really depends on how you look at it, but yeah, like, because there's some color stuff that you can do with HDRIs, but yeah, there's a couple things that will need to be changed that I couldn't find where to do that with an HDRI, so we are doing this instead. So next, the settings I'm going to be using after you get the light set up, like the sun lamp, which I haven't changed any of its settings yet. You go to the render tab, which is this one here, turn on ambient occlusion, bloom, screen space reflections, and in the shadows tab, change method from ESM to VSM, turn on high bit depth and soft shadows. Now, ambient occlusion basically just makes it where there's more shadow in between objects that change angle extremely quickly, like all these 90-degree angles, which for some reason there's not a big difference anymore. When in one of my previous attempts it worked much better. This time it didn't do as well. Either way, let's continue on. So that's a pretty important setting, especially the VSM. Now VSM, let me explain that real quick, and screen space reflections and bloom. Forgot to explain those. Bloom basically makes it where in a certain amount, if light is powerful enough, it will actually give a bloom effect, which makes it seem like it's giving off light, even if it's technically not. So that's actually how we're going to fake light being given off by our build over here. And it actually fits pretty well. It looks sort of realistic, though it doesn't actually give off any real light. So it has a couple issues, but that's fine. So let's continue on. Next part, screen space reflections. Basically, it calculates the reflections based on your screen. anything that says screen space is basically it's only going to be rendering it inside of your screen, which is important. So basically it's going to be rendering inside the screen and everything out of it won't be rendered in. So it's not very accurate, truthfully. However, it's still extremely useful to make sure that you have it turned on, because it does add that little bit of realism that you need to make it look a little bit better. So it's definitely very useful to turn on, though it's going to be very subtle, especially for Minecraft stuff. VSM and shadows basically is a more graphics processor intensive method for shadows. So basically it just looks better because it's using up more information. Then high bit depth basically means that there's more bits for the shadows, I believe that's what it means, but there's more information, so the shadows are smoother. Then soft shadows basically means that there's going to be multiple lamps, basically, so it's actually going to have more realistic soft shadows. Currently I'm changing the color to be a bit more yellow so that it looks more realistic. Turning up the, I'm trying to match the lighting with the background, roughly. And contact shadows is really important as well, even though it's not technically very realistic. Yep, there we go, that's better. I can use space. What do these buttons do? They don't do anything? That's nice. Oh, what'd I do? Anyway, so contact shadows is also screen space. And basically, as you can see here, this is a contact shadow. And it's basically seeing, oh, this is contacting that in the background. So it's not very realistic if you have it turned all the way up. So let me continue on with what we're doing. So as you can see, I turned it down, turned down the thickness. Basically, you can turn that to whatever you want, but I just turned it to this. It really depends on what you're doing. And I turned up the smoothness a little bit, but yeah, in this setting over here, make sure you turn on shadows and contact shadows. Now, one thing which I'm not sure if you actually saw, which was here, all these black lines are because of bleed bias, because it's turned up to 1. You need bleed bias to make sure that there's no light shining through the blocks. So don't turn up. So basically it starts at 0 and you can turn it up to make sure there's less and less light. Well, if you turn it up to 1, it creates these weird lines. So actually you need to turn up to 0.9 and then it fixes your issues. So that's what you should actually do instead. Then turn on contact shadows and make sure that the thickness is fairly short and not too awfully large. They'll definitely have that. It makes it look quite a bit more realistic. And you can fidget with those settings all you want until you get the kind of effect that you want it to look like. And I believe this is pretty good. I tried figuring out how to use the ambient occlusion thing, make it look right, but for some reason it's not really changing anything currently, even though I thought it should be, which doesn't make a lot of sense because it did previously, but that's fine. This was one of the main areas where I saw a difference in ambient occlusion, but yeah, as mentioned, it didn't necessarily have that much of an effect, which is weird. And I'm speeding this up quite a bit. So you can speed up more. Nope, I won't. Okay, apparently 2 is the fastest I'm allowed to speed that up. Let's see. Yeah, oh, there you can see the screen space reflections there for a second. Though, let's see. Can I go backwards a little bit? Nope, won't let me go backwards. Let's see, I want to go back to here. So oh, you can see it right there is screen space reflections. Basically, that is the, yeah, you can see light from this bouncing onto that, and it's making it a little bit of a tint of green. At least that's what I believe it is. Yeah, screen space reflections can be useful like that. I believe there's some more there, because I'm pretty sure that's screen space reflections. There's also a couple other areas that have it. Pretty useful. Adds in a slight bit of realism to it, even if it is a little bit glitchy sometimes. But anyways, I just got myself another no, I didn't. I'm about to get myself a lamp pretty decently soon. Just gotta wait for me to get it. Let's see. Yeah, don't change anything cascade shadow map, because I haven't really seen that it changes anything, truthfully. I just messed something up. Also, this is a casual video, so I'm allowed to drink. At least I'm not eating. Oh, jeez. Like the last video. I just went down in the wrong pipe. That's some good cherry juice right there. But yeah, basically this takes a little bit of fidgeting because it is so sensitive. You want to make sure you match the lighting in the background with the lighting in your scene. And there is the bloom, as you can see there, which looks pretty cool and definitely saves you some render time. That's the main reason it has the fake bloom. Let's see. Looking pretty good, looking pretty good. Sorry it's taking so long, but definitely going to be a little bit faster than it would be normally because I have it sped up ×2. Here's an area lamp. This area lamp, basically, I'm using what's called the 3-point lighting system. So if you think about it, there's light coming from over in that direction, which is the sun. There's a light coming from above and from behind. And you're probably thinking, well, there's more light than that coming from everywhere. Yeah, there is, but for the most part, there's 3 main light sources in color. And what the heck is this? And why is it showing up? Restart to install newest Windows feature up. I don't care. I don't care. No. Anyways, so with the sun, it goes off and it bounces around, blah, 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 blah. There's also light that bounces up in the sky, and there's clouds there, which is white. So basically there's white light coming down onto us. So there's yellow, fair sort of yellow light, then there's white light, and then there's blue light. And blue light is everywhere, and it's a big filler light. So really you could use quite a few small blue lights, but for the most part, because you're not going to see the blue from this side because how the light mixes with the yellow. But if you go on this side and add the blue, it ends up giving the exact same result as if you had blue light coming from everywhere. Maybe not the exact same, but a fairly similar result. So basically to save time, you use 3 lights: yellow, white, and blue. That's what we're doing here, and this is where soft shadows is important. Soft shadows allows you to have multiple light sources. So basically what soft shadow does, instead of having this entire thing be one big lamp, what it does is when it increases the size, you end up having a bunch of lamps all over placed randomly throughout this, and that's what samples are for. So in the rendering setting, or maybe output, no, the rendering setting, there's a sample rate, and I believe it's generally set at a standard of 16. That basically means that there's, I don't know if it has 16 lights, but basically, let's think of it as if you have 16 lights. Whenever you have the samples on 16, you'll have 16 lights randomly placed throughout this and around this one here, and whatever light you're using is going to be 16, and they're going to be randomly placed throughout the square. And if you have a bigger square, then they have a bigger distance, and then they're altering the effects of whatever is in this area, giving it, making it more realistically, a more realistic soft shadow. So the more lights you have, the more realistic it's going to look. As you can see there, you can see the light being calculated from different positions. And this also sets the value of the shadow, because many of the shadows are too dark. Now, I like some contrast, so I end up leaving mine way too dark, and well, actually, yeah, I end up leaving it a bit too dark in my opinion, even though I do like my contrast. I probably should have brightened it up just a little bit. I don't know. I thought about being a bit towards the nighttime. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, around here, this is about where I keep it, and it's pretty useful to use this many light sources for sure. It's definitely something I would recommend everyone to do, especially with Eevee, because it doesn't necessarily work very well whenever you're using an HDR in Eevee. HDRs do not seem to work well, as mentioned previously. And here's the blue light I'll be adding as well, and then I also changed the settings in all of those to have contact shadows and all that jazz that I used earlier, as you can see there, and I also changed the setting of it so the bleed bias is the correct amount, so that there's less issues in the scene, and so on and so on. So you can increase it. Nope, can't. Okay. So that's fairly important, especially since you need to have all these lights set correctly, and this makes the lights this makes the shadows fairly blue, which is realistic because there's a blue sky everywhere. And let's see what's next. I wish I could skip it. I'm sort of worried about accidentally skipping something important. But yeah, I think it's turning out pretty well so far. yeah, a few things I want to mention, but that's fine. I think this will be the last video in this particular series of Blender tutorials. I'm planning on doing a few more. So that should be pretty interesting, especially there's a specific one I know you guys will want on how to transfer your builds from Blender into Minecraft. Well, not necessarily transferring, but whatever. It's transferring-ish. This cherry juice is very good. As you're about to actually see me change the bleed bias a little bit. Actually, there is some of the bleed bias as you saw from the under it. And here I am changing the bleed bias, and this should definitely improve. Yep, there you go. As you saw, there's a lot more shadows in those areas. Now obviously you can't have it at 1, you have to have it 0.9. As you can see, there's a lot more shadow in those areas, which looks quite a bit more realistic in my opinion, because those are really sharp areas. And I like that quite a bit actually. Let's see, I wish I could skip ahead without accidentally skipping something. I'm worried about that. There we go, we're getting our Irradiance volume. Shift A and then you go down to light probe and then Irradiance volume, and you scale it up to the size using the thing over here. You scale it up and get it to the size of your scene. And I'm not entirely sure, I like getting the cube to be, the smallest cube to be the size of the thing, but I believe I'm wrong actually. I'm not entirely sure about that. Because I'm not entirely sure, because I remember I'm gonna have to rewatch Blender Guru's video on the subject, which I'd also recommend you watching his video on that subject. In fact, he's about to make a new video on how to use Blender 2.8, so definitely recommend watching his new one, which will be on like his donut scene. It's a really famous video. He's redoing it for Blender 2.8. Either way, it's going to be a pretty good video. Recommend watching it. Let me actually explain what this is so I can get back on track. So in the Irradiance volume, what this is each one of these round circular objects of, I don't know what they are technically, but yeah, Irradiance. They're Irradiance collectors. They're light things. Yeah, technical terms. You don't have to know everything to use this, but you go into you select it and you can go into the settings, and in the settings you can set how many of these you have. Now the more you have, the higher the resolution it is. Basically what it is each one of these round little dots, let's just say tennis balls, each one of these little tennis balls will collect light from around it. And I believe actually it collects from here to here. I'm not entirely sure on that part. I don't know a lot about Irradiance volumes. I haven't used too much of Eevee personally. I mean, fair amount, and especially after making this video, I've learned how to use it a lot better, because I found some of the glitches that were preventing me to be able to make really nice renders, which is very good, because sort of like the one with the HDRs and with the light bleed being set too high, or the bleed bias being set too high, which makes it too low. Yeah, confusing. Anyways, these things collect the light and scan the area around it for light bounces. So basically it calculates the light around it and bakes in the realistic lighting. So like in Cycles it has light bounces and stuff like that. Well, it's basically doing that same, or not really same, but very, very similar process to render this area out with bounce lighting, and it's saving it. So it's saving the bounce lighting into the scene. And that is actually quite important, and you'll see this later, and I believe, if I can remember, I'll actually point it out, and it should help you remember it quite a bit better. But it saves it in each one of these little round things, so that it saves the scene and saves all the light bounces and makes it a lot more realistic. So the more you have, the more light it'll be able to figure out more accurately. Because, for example, with all these little cubes, sometimes these things right here can only get the general idea of light bounce rather than very, very specific. Especially for a scene like this with so many cubes and faces, it'd just be extremely difficult to really get the entire scene to look perfect. So it's not necessarily, you don't have to worry about that. In fact, once you get the lighting correct, it looks good no matter what you do. So I would recommend just setting it to be more general. You don't have to use a ton. In fact, 16, let me explain this thing over here. So if you go into Irradiance volume settings, I'm about to say 16 by 16 by 16 a second ago, but in these settings here, which I was about to talk about too early, these set how many lights you're going to have in a certain region. So basically, if we counted up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, blah, 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 it'd be 16 of these tall, it'd be 16 to the right, and 16 long. Now, why that's important is because then we can also adjust how many we want, because the more we have, the more realistic the bounce lighting we'll have. At least that's my interpretation of it. That may not be 100% entirely true, but for the most part, that's what I'm pretty sure it's like, because yeah, the less you have, the less information it can save. So with these here, so basically 8 is fair. I mean, you could do a scene with 8 and it's not going to be too bad, and it's going to get the general idea of the light bounces. So I mean, if you don't want to have, if you don't want to wait in a long time, the light already looks pretty good already. So it doesn't necessarily need a massive amount of time to save all this. It already looks pretty fairly decent. If you want an okay render, I would recommend 16 by 16 by 16. And if you want to make sure that the light is really, really good, 32 is a bit overkill, but I have done it before, and it does actually look pretty fairly decent. Even compared to like cycles-ish. So I would recommend a 32, but that's generally overkill. In fact, this is 32 by 32 by 32, and whenever you get really close, you can see it, but it just looks pretty crazy. I tried saying it'd be a bit more custom, but it just doesn't look as good. Yeah, this is 256 by 256 by 16. Yeah, this is just extreme. So you don't need that many for sure. You basically just need 16 by 16 is what I'm using. And if I really want to be careful or be safe, I'd probably use 32. Let's see. Let's get this thing rendering. There we go. This is it rendering, and you can actually see it calculating the bounce light each time. Let me actually skip ahead. It's going to take a while. There we go. And I just got back, I believe. Maybe. Nope. And 13. Nope. Okay, 13. There we go. That's pretty fairly close. As you can see, you can actually see some of the... As you can see, you can actually see great English. You can see the bounce lighting in the scene now, actually. I can't really find an example for some reason. Oh, yeah, like right here you can see some bounce lighting on that area there. It's a bit more orange in this section. But it's pretty subtle, especially with the... since I don't have a massive amount, but as I said, I don't really use a massive amount that often, and I haven't used a massive amount in this scene before, so obviously it could be vastly different. Let's see, let's get this moving on. Hopefully it will hurry up. Yep, actually that's a scene right there. You saw the orange on the side over there. On the pathway, there was orange light bouncing off of this onto the pathway. That was like the most obvious example. And I'm not sure if you saw that. Let's see, let me go back. Oh geez, don't want to go that far back. That was a bit too much. Yep, that was really extreme. Oh well. Oh, there it is. And you can see it still. That's very, very orange, and that's bounce lighting. There we go. Also, that might be screen space reflections, which helps out quite a bit as well. So, yes. And I think I end up changing it to 16. Yeah, I end up changing it to 16 to make it a bit more realistic, because I wasn't entirely sure how good it was to compare, so I could compare the results. But I don't remember doing that because... Yeah, let's see. Continue on. This one took a while. I ended up watching quite a bit of a TV show while doing this. As you can see, that's quite a bit of this video was it rendering. Wow. It's really long. Okay, that's oh. Oh, I gotta wait to show up. There we go, it took long enough. Okay. So I ended up liking this one about the same, actually. even though it was a bit more realistic. But since I wanted a fairly decent render, I wanted to be safe, so I ended up doing that to make sure that I got it exactly how I wanted. But now I'm going to go down to stained glass and actually change the texture of stained glass to be emissive. Can't believe I'm great at English. Keep saying emissive instead of emissive. Either way, it's not actually possible to make an emissive texture because of the limitation of a game render engine or a game-like render engine. Basically, the only reason I'm able to do this is because I'm using Bloom to create a fake lighting, which is actually really interesting. You can get fairly decent results doing this, which is pretty cool. So make an emission texture, Shift A, go to shader, go to emission, then go to color, make that bluish, then you can turn the strength up and it will become glowy because of the bloom that we have turned on in our scene. And now I'm getting a empty, which you can just go to, you can Shift A, let me go back actually. Shift A, and then you can go to empty, and then cube, and then we can move that where we want to, because this is what we're going to be using for the what is it called? The focus. There we go, the focus of it. And actually, oh, right there, you can actually see the light bounces. You can actually see light bounces there. That's more orange than what it's supposed to be. So that's pretty interesting. So there we go, and you should already know how to do focus with a camera because I showed you how to do that previously. But if you don't, here it is. You go down to depth of field and you turn that on, and then you get your eyedropper the empty, move it around, and set your f-stop to what you want it to be. Pretty simple. And I wish I could skip this faster, but I can't. There we go. I'm just fidgeting around with it, making sure I get it about right. Just remember, don't turn it up too high or too low, because if it's too low, it's going to look awful. And if it's too high, then it's like almost no, it's like everything's in focus, which is weird. I end up moving the cube quite a bit because I wanted to get the focus where I wanted it. That's another way to manipulate the focus, is by moving around whatever you have the distance set to. And here we go. Still fidgeting around with it. There we go. Still, yep. There we go. A cube. And actually right here in this scene, if we zoomed in, I might end up doing this later, but you can actually see orange there. That's orange bounce lighting from the light over here bouncing onto it, from it saving what we did, from it saving the bounce lighting, which is very, very interesting and very important actually. Oh, especially there you can see it glowing. Actually, if you just look at the cube right next to many of those areas, there's a lot of sections that will have bounce lighting. Especially, as mentioned, you know, that one right there. That's just a lot of light bouncing onto it. And you can see it there still even. So that's actually pretty interesting. But anyways, we're actually going to we delete the principal shader and we go to Shift A, we go to shader, we go to volume scatter and volume absorption, and we set those up together with an add shader, and you know, we go Shift A, shader, add shader, and when we add those together to create a fairly decent fog kind of deal, and we get a Musgrave texture later because I couldn't find any good textures. I tried doing a few different things and I just end up using a Musgrave texture, I believe. Actually, no, oops, didn't mean to press that. End up using a Musgrave texture, and I scale it, and I scale it up to where I want it to be, and it's pretty easy. Wait, let me actually explain that. Nope, did not mean to do that. I gotta go right back to where I was. Anyways, here we go. Use the Musgrave texture, and I'm going to actually set an animation to this in a couple minutes. So basically, let me show you how to get that set up. So we take the color and we go into a divide so that we can divide it down, which you Shift A. I gotta show you that. Go back. let's do it from here. This is exactly why I don't skip ahead most of the time. There we go, converter math, and then we go to divide. So basically we take the color input, we go into one value, and then we take those two values and put them into the density output. And we have our Musgrave, and then we can change that, and here we go. So what you can do, and you'll see me do this once I skip far enough back. Here we go. I press I right click on it to insert keyframe, which you saw me. I right clicked and then I insert keyframe. And I believe I'm about to do that again with a detail or whatever. Now to do the second frame, what you do is you actually go to wherever you want to be, which is right here, 250. This was the first frame, and then I go to I set the keyframe, then I go to 250, and then I reset a new keyframe at this location. And then I also change the density at the first location as well, in order to make it where it changes density throughout the scene so that it makes it look like it's moving. Yeah, anyways, let's continue on, it's taking forever. And we can also do that with cameras as well, which I'll be showing you in a second. That's the scene, and here we go. I'm actually doing that now. I actually have to redo it. Let me show you the process of that. So actually, here we go. I press at this location, I press I, and then I press location, and then I press I again, I press a rotation, and it sets the keyframes. The next time I go to do that, it'll actually just have I press I, and then it just has available. I click on available, it will do location and rotation. So that because it does all of the available keyframe things that I have set. Then I move it again, and one mistake I keep making is I don't set the keyframe first. I mean, I don't go to the frame I want first. I move the camera where I want it, then I set the keyframe, which is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to you're supposed to go to the position that you want, then, yeah, go to the position you want, then go to position, then set your keyframes. Then see, you go over to here, 120, and you move it over to where you want it to be, and then you set your then you press I and press available again, as you can see me do here, and you repeat that again, and you move your thing over, which I didn't do for some reason. Let's continue on. Here we go, and we have it set up properly, and that looks quite nice. And one thing I'm actually quite interested in seeing is that scene rendering, because I actually do have it showing it in the render process. Oh, actually not the entire render process, because it ends up taking longer to do that. I'll actually show you that because there's output settings. Here we go. So in the output there is the resolution, obviously, which we can also use this to adjust the resolution. We have render region. I don't use this or that, especially in Eevee, and I'm not entirely sure what they do in cycles because generally I don't need them, but I believe they're actually important, so I might have to re-look that up, or if you need to look it up, there's also, Blender Guru, which I would recommend. Frame rate is important because if you have depending on your frame rate, it will adjust how quick it will render, or how many frames per second it will do, kind of deal, or the frame rate of the animation whenever you're viewing it, especially in this area. So it gives you a better idea of what you're going to be doing. Now, because it renders pictures, which is because I don't set up the output correctly, it sets up in pictures, so you actually have to change that again, which actually I think I might end up making another video on this. But you take it into a program such as Shotcut, which I believe you can actually just have it as a video program, and I believe you can also do this in Blender, changing it to a video. But you basically, if you press this right here, this is the file format. I believe there's actually a video file format that you can use instead of using. Let me actually check that real quick. I didn't check that because I forget to use it, because for the most part I generally don't need to use that setting very often. So let's see if it's in there. Let's see. So we have movie. Yeah, here we go. We have FFmpeg video, and we have AV JPEG. So we can actually export it as a movie or whatever, and it will output it as a video. Now you can also output it as a image as well, which I end up doing, and I end up changing it by doing some interesting things. And before I publish the video, I'll actually double check to make sure that this is right. And if it does let you do that, I'll actually have a notification or something like that. Or I'll let you know somehow. Yeah, I'll put it in the description whether or not this works or not. And if it doesn't work, then I will make another video on how to use images to make a video. Let me click back out of that. And why don't I actually just show you? Why didn't I just show you the rest? Whatever. Anyways, so in this is actually the quality of it. So we have the color depth, how much depth of color that has 16 or 8. I just used 8 because that's pretty standard. I mean, 16 actually is a good idea depending on what kind of image, especially if it's a specialty image, but if it's not, then yeah. Compression is also important. I believe it's lossless as well. Basically, compression will make it where each image is smaller in size, but it's lossless as well, which is important. So basically, if you turn it up to 100% compression and compress it as far as possible, it will take longer to render. However, the video size and the file size will be smaller, which can be really important. So this would be something I would recommend doing if you're doing a very long video. Let's skip ahead. I believe that's actually pretty much it. Oh yeah, output file. Basically, you click on this and you select what file you want the video to output at. And make sure it's an empty file and not your desktop, because if you're doing images like I do, then it's going to be a massive thing. And I'm not entirely sure about the video format, because I've actually never used that before. I just generally render as images, which is actually pretty useful, because then you can actually select individual images in your scene and then use them as a render if you like a specific spot. Like you can go right here or anywhere in your little picture or film you have going on, and you can use that as a render because each one is a separate image, which is pretty handy, and it gives you a lot of ability to be able to manipulate the scene to be able to do what you want to do. Anyways, so this right here in color management, I actually turned up to medium high contrast in the render settings in order to make it look a little bit more contrasty, which I personally like, but that's personal preference and you don't need to do that. But if you do want to do that, you can. And here we go. I just rendered the image, and I'm just going to cut it out about now, well, but pretty soon, because then you can see the finished result of the render that I have going on. And yeah, after that, pretty much nothing, because this is the end of the video. Hope you have a wonderful, great, sublime, fantastic day.